On the morning of September 8, 1900, one of the richest cities in America disappeared beneath the sea. By the time the sun rose the following day, entire neighborhoods had been erased. Thousands of families were gone. Streets that had once echoed with the sounds of commerce had become silent fields of wreckage. The dead outnumbered the living, and an entire nation struggled to comprehend what had happened. It remains the deadliest natural disaster in American history. Almost no one believed it could happen. To understand why, we have to travel back to a different Galveston, a city filled with confidence, ambition, and unimaginable prosperity. In 1900, Galveston was known as the Queen City of the Gulf. Located on a narrow barrier island off the Texas coast, it had transformed itself into one of the busiest ports in the United States. Cotton from across Texas flowed through its docks before being shipped around the world. Steamships arrived daily carrying immigrants, manufactured goods, and fortunes waiting to be made. The city pulsed with opportunity. Elegant Victorian mansions lined broad avenues shaded by oak trees. Luxury hotels welcomed wealthy visitors escaping the summer heat. Electric streetcars rolled past opera houses, banks, schools, and churches built from brick and limestone. Nearly 40,000 people called Galveston home. It was a place where merchants became millionaires, where businesses expanded every year, and where optimism seemed almost impossible to exhaust. For many Americans, Galveston represented the future of the Southwest. Few imagined that everything they had built rested only a few feet above sea level. Life revolved around the Gulf of Mexico. Every sunrise brought fishermen onto the water before the heat settled over the island. Cargo ships crowded the harbor while dockworkers unloaded cotton bales, lumber, grain, and machinery from around the world. Children played along wide sandy beaches. Families gathered beneath colorful umbrellas while waves gently rolled ashore. Horse-drawn carriages shared the streets with the latest electric trolleys, symbols of a city embracing modern technology while still holding onto the elegance of the Victorian era. To visitors, Galveston seemed almost magical. Its ocean breezes cooled the humid Texas air, and newspapers across the country praised the city as one of America's finest coastal destinations. Business leaders believed the city's future had no limits. New hotels were being planned. Banks continued lending. Investors poured money into real estate. Every year, the skyline grew larger. Nature, however, had shaped Galveston long before people ever arrived. The island stretched roughly 27 miles along the Texas coastline, but measured only a few miles across. Much of its surface stood less than 9 feet above sea level. There were no cliffs, no protective hills, no mountains to weaken approaching storms. Only open water separated the city from the immense Gulf of Mexico. Today, such geography immediately raises concern among meteorologists. But in 1900, scientific understanding of hurricanes remained limited. Whether forecasting was still in its infancy. Satellites did not exist. Aircraft had not yet taken flight. Radar would not be invented for decades. Meteorologists relied on scattered observations from ships at sea, coastal weather stations, and telegraph messages that often arrived too late. Every storm remained something of a mystery. One man stood at the center of Galveston's weather forecasting. Isaac Monroe Klein served as chief of the local Weather Bureau office. Highly respected and deeply knowledgeable, Klein dedicated his life to understanding the atmosphere. Years earlier, he had publicly argued that Galveston faced little danger from a catastrophic hurricane. The city's location, he believed, made such an event extremely unlikely. Like many scientists of his era, Klein underestimated the true power of storm surge, the enormous dome of seawater pushed ashore by powerful hurricanes. It was a mistake that countless others shared. The residents trusted the experts trusted their understanding of nature. And nature was about to expose just how incomplete that understanding truly was. Far out over the tropical Atlantic, something had already begun. A cluster of thunderstorms drifted westward beneath the blazing summer sun. Over warm ocean water, the system slowly organized itself. Day after day, it gathered energy invisible to those living comfortably along the Gulf Coast. As it crossed the Caribbean Sea, ships encountered strengthening winds and towering waves. Some captains attempted to warn authorities through telegraph stations, whenever they reached port. But communication across international waters remained fragmented. Critical observations never reached everyone who needed them. Even worse, disagreements within international weather organizations limited the sharing of storm data. Every missing report became another piece of the puzzle left unseen. While the storm strengthened over thousands of miles of open ocean, life in Galveston continued almost unchanged. Merchants negotiated contracts. Children prepared for another week of school. Church bells rang across the city. Hotels remained crowded with visitors enjoying the warm September weather. The harbor bustled with activity from sunrise until sunset. Nothing about the peaceful island suggested that history was quietly approaching from beyond the horizon. Then, almost imperceptibly, the sea began to change. The waves rolled a little farther onto the beach. The wind carried more moisture than before. Barometers slowly drifted downward. Fishermen noticed the Gulf behaving strangely. Yet few felt genuine fear. Storms were common. Galveston had survived many before. Most assumed this one would be no different. None of them realized they were watching the first signs of one of the most powerful hurricanes ever to strike the United States. By the time the truth became impossible to ignore, there would be almost nowhere left to run. By the morning of September 7, 1900, the Gulf of Mexico no longer looked familiar. The breeze had grown stronger overnight. Waves rolled in with unusual force, crashing farther up the beach than anyone could remember. The air felt unnaturally heavy, as if the atmosphere itself were holding its breath. Still, Galveston woke to another ordinary day. Merchants unlocked their storefronts. Dockworkers reported to the harbor. Children played in the streets while tourists wandered along the shoreline, watching the rough surf with curiosity rather than concern. Few realized they were looking directly at one of the greatest hurricanes in American history. More than 1,000 miles away, the storm had already carved a destructive path through the Caribbean. Crossing the warm tropical waters, it fed continuously on ocean temperatures approaching 85 degrees Fahrenheit. Every hour, the hurricane became larger, stronger, and more organized. Cuba had already suffered devastating winds. Ships crossing the Gulf reported mountainous seas and hurricane-force conditions. Experienced captains described waves taller than buildings and winds that seemed capable of tearing the sky apart. Whenever possible, these reports were telegraphed to weather stations along the coast, but the technology of 1900 had dangerous limitations. There were no satellites orbiting Earth, no weather radar scanning approaching storms, no reconnaissance aircraft flying into hurricanes. Meteorologists could only estimate a storm's position using scattered reports that were often many hours old. It was like trying to understand a wildfire while looking through a keyhole. Political tensions made matters even worse. Only 2 years earlier, the Spanish-American War had strained relations between the United States and Cuba. As a result, American weather officials often distrusted hurricane observations made by Cuban meteorologists, even though Cuba possessed some of the most experienced tropical storm forecasters in the world. Those forecasters believed the hurricane would continue into the Gulf of Mexico. Some American officials disagreed. Instead, they predicted the storm would curve harmlessly northeast into the Atlantic. It was a tragic misunderstanding. The hurricane never turned. It kept moving relentlessly toward Texas. Inside Galveston's Weather Bureau office, Chief Meteorologist Isaac Klein studied the latest reports. The barometer continued to fall. The wind strengthened with every passing hour. Rain bands swept across the island before disappearing again. Klein recognized that a serious storm was approaching. But even then, few imagined the true danger. For decades, Galveston had endured tropical storms without catastrophe. The city had become accustomed to rough weather. Residents nailed shutters over windows, secured loose furniture, and expected to ride out another difficult day. There was concern, but there was not panic. One danger remained almost completely misunderstood. Today, meteorologists often describe wind as only one part of a hurricane. The deadliest threat is usually storm surge, the massive dome of seawater pushed ashore by the storm's immense circulation. In 1900, very few people understood just how deadly storm surge could become. Galveston stood barely 8 or 9 feet above sea level. Its highest buildings gave residents confidence. But the island itself had almost no natural protection if enough water arrived. There would be nowhere for it to go. Early that Friday afternoon, fishermen noticed something deeply unsettling. The Gulf was rising, not in waves alone. The entire sea appeared higher than normal. Water crept steadily across beaches that had been dry only hours earlier. Piers disappeared beneath the surf. Boats strained violently against their mooring lines. The tide seemed almost alive. Older sailors exchanged uneasy glances. Some quietly began moving their families inland. Others simply hoped the water would stop rising. It didn't. Throughout the afternoon, the wind intensified. 30 miles per hour became 40. 40 became 50. Palm trees bent toward the streets. Loose signs ripped from buildings. Electric wires swayed violently overhead. Streetcars struggled to maintain their schedules. Rain arrived in heavy bursts before giving way to eerie moments of calm, only to return with even greater force. Each passing hour erased another layer of normal life. Isaac Klein made a decision. Realizing conditions were worsening faster than expected, he left the Weather Bureau office and rode on horseback through the city. He warned residents living along the beaches that the storm posed serious danger. He urged families to seek stronger shelter. It was an extraordinary action. Never before had a Weather Bureau official personally ridden through the streets issuing warnings. But time was already slipping away. Many people listened. Many did not. Some believed they had survived stronger storms. Others feared abandoning their homes more than the approaching weather. No official evacuation order existed. There was nowhere obvious to evacuate. The island itself offered little high ground. By evening, Galveston's streets had begun flooding, not from rain, from the Gulf itself. Water surged through intersections that had never flooded before. Horse-drawn wagons struggled through rising currents. Residents stood on porches watching seawater flow around their homes in disbelief. Children laughed and splashed through what seemed like an unusual high tide. Adults exchanged nervous smiles. Surely the water would begin falling soon. Instead, it kept rising. Out beyond the horizon, hidden behind curtains of rain and darkness, the hurricane continued its relentless approach. Its enormous circulation stretched for hundreds of miles. Near its center, winds likely exceeded 140 miles per hour. Every minute, unimaginable amounts of seawater were being pushed toward the vulnerable barrier island. Galveston could no longer escape what was coming. The city had reached the point of no return. Within hours, the Gulf of Mexico would simply erase the boundary between ocean and land, and the longest night in American history was about to begin. As darkness settled over Galveston on the evening of September 8, 1900, the city ceased to exist as anyone had known it. The wind no longer came in gusts. It screamed continuously. Roofs rattled beneath a relentless force that seemed determined to tear every building apart. Rain struck windows like handfuls of gravel, while the roar of the Gulf grew louder than the storm itself. Outside, visibility had fallen to almost nothing. The hurricane had arrived. By 8 o'clock that evening, the island was already flooding from every direction. This was no ordinary high tide. The Gulf of Mexico had become a moving mountain of water. Driven by hurricane-force winds, millions of tons of seawater surged across the low barrier island, swallowing roads, railways, gardens, and entire neighborhoods. Within minutes, familiar streets became rivers. Horse-drawn wagons floated away. Wooden fences disappeared beneath muddy water. Gas lamps flickered before vanishing into darkness. The city was losing every landmark that had once made navigation possible. Families gathered inside their homes, believing thick walls would protect them. Many had moved upstairs as floodwaters entered the first floor. Parents reassured frightened children. Neighbors prayed together by candlelight. Some sang hymns simply to drown out the terrifying sound outside. But every passing minute brought another crash. Windows shattered. Doors burst inward. Entire walls trembled under the relentless pressure of the wind. The houses themselves had begun to fail. Near the shoreline, buildings simply disappeared. Small cottages were lifted from their foundations and carried away like driftwood. Some remained intact for a few moments, floating through the darkness before smashing into other structures. Each collapsing building became another massive battering ram carried by the flood. Soon the water contained everything imaginable. Entire houses, telephone poles, railroad ties, tree trunks, furniture, livestock, broken wagons, even sections of railway track. The storm had transformed the city itself into a weapon. The winds intensified even further. Modern estimates suggest sustained winds exceeded 140 miles per hour, with even stronger gusts. There were no instruments left capable of measuring them. Galveston's official anemometer had blown apart after recording winds above 100 miles per hour. Beyond that point, no one knew exactly how powerful the hurricane had become. Nature had literally destroyed the tools meant to observe it. Chief meteorologist Isaac Klein watched helplessly as conditions spiraled beyond anything he had imagined. His own home was overwhelmed by rising water. As the building collapsed beneath the force of the storm, his wife, Cora, suffered fatal injuries. Despite desperate efforts to save her, she would not survive. The hurricane had become deeply personal. Even the man responsible for warning the city could not protect the people he loved most. It was a tragedy he carried for the rest of his life. By late evening, nearly the entire island lay underwater. In many places, the storm surge reached more than 15 feet above normal sea level. The distinction between streets and the Gulf had vanished completely. Only rooftops remained visible above the churning water. Families climbed into attics hoping to escape the flood. For some, that decision proved fatal. As the water continued rising, many became trapped beneath their own roofs with no way out. Others climbed onto rooftops, clinging to chimneys while hurricane-force winds threatened to sweep them away. Everywhere across the island, survival had become a matter of minutes. Then came the debris field. Thousands of shattered buildings merged into one enormous moving mass. Entire city blocks collided together inside the floodwaters. The destruction fed itself. Every structure that collapsed created more debris. More debris destroyed more buildings. More buildings added even more wreckage to the torrent. The process accelerated until almost nothing remained standing in the neighborhoods closest to the Gulf. The hurricane no longer needed the wind alone. The city itself had become the instrument of its own destruction. Throughout the night, desperate survivors searched for any object strong enough to hold onto. Some clung to floating doors. Others wrapped their arms around broken trees or overturned wagons. Groups of strangers helped one another climb onto drifting rooftops. Acts of extraordinary courage unfolded in complete darkness. Neighbors formed human chains through chest-deep water. Parents lifted loved ones above the waves for as long as their strength allowed. Some risked everything to rescue people trapped inside collapsing buildings. Many never returned. Midnight came, then 1 o'clock, then 2. Still, the hurricane showed no sign of weakening. Hour after hour, the island endured unimaginable punishment. The roar never stopped. The wind never rested. The water never stopped rising. Those who survived later described the sound as thousands of freight trains passing directly overhead without pause. No one slept. Most believed they would not live to see morning. Then, sometime before dawn, the water stopped rising. The wind, though still violent, began to ease ever so slightly. The worst of the hurricane had finally begun moving inland, but the darkness concealed what the storm had left behind. No one yet knew that entire neighborhoods had vanished, that thousands of lives had been lost, that one of America's greatest cities had been reduced to ruins in a single night. When daylight finally broke over Galveston, the survivors would witness a scene so devastating that many would later struggle to find words for what they had seen. The hurricane was over. The true catastrophe was only beginning. The first light of dawn revealed a city that no longer existed. As the sun slowly climbed above the Gulf of Mexico on September 9, 1900, survivors emerged from shattered buildings into a world almost beyond recognition. The familiar streets of Galveston had vanished. Entire neighborhoods had been erased so completely that many people could no longer tell where they were standing. Roads disappeared beneath mountains of broken timber and brick. Railroad tracks twisted into impossible shapes. Steamships rested hundreds of yards inland, stranded where homes had stood only hours before. Silence settled over the island, not because there was nothing to hear, but because the scale of destruction left those who survived without words. Everywhere they looked, there was loss. Churches had collapsed. Schools were gone. Hotels that had welcomed thousands of visitors lay reduced to splintered piles of lumber. Some of the city's grand Victorian mansions had simply disappeared, leaving only empty foundations buried beneath mud and debris. The harbor, the economic heart of Galveston, had become an enormous graveyard of shattered piers, overturned vessels, and wrecked warehouses. The Queen City of the Gulf had fallen in a single night. The survivors immediately began searching for family members. People wandered through the ruins calling out names. Parents searched for children. Children searched for parents. Neighbors dug through collapsed buildings with their bare hands, hoping to hear even the faintest reply beneath the wreckage. Occasionally, someone would be pulled alive from a collapsed structure, and for a brief moment hope returned. But those moments became increasingly rare. With every passing hour, the terrible truth became impossible to ignore. Thousands had not survived. No one knew exactly how many lives had been lost. Communication with the mainland had been almost completely severed. Telegraph lines lay tangled across flooded streets. Railroad bridges had been washed away. The island had become isolated from the outside world. For nearly a full day, much of the nation had little idea what had happened. Rumors spread faster than facts. Some newspapers reported severe flooding. Others spoke of a damaged port. Very few imagined that an American city had suffered destruction on such an unimaginable scale. When rescue teams finally reached Galveston, they struggled to comprehend what they saw. Debris covered almost every street. In some places, it formed piles more than 20 feet high. Entire houses had been crushed together into enormous tangled masses of lumber, bricks, iron, furniture, wagons, and ship's cargo. Moving even a few yards required climbing over mountains of wreckage. The city had become almost impassable, yet rescue workers continued searching. Every hour mattered. The greatest challenge soon became one that no one had prepared for. The number of victims was overwhelming. Bodies were found throughout the island, inside collapsed buildings, tangled within debris fields along the shoreline and carried inland by the storm's surge. At first, officials attempted to bury the dead. But the scale of the disaster quickly exceeded every available resource. There were too many, too little equipment, too few workers. Under the relentless September heat, concerns about disease and sanitation grew rapidly. Faced with impossible circumstances, emergency authorities were forced to make heartbreaking decisions in order to protect the surviving population. It was one of the darkest chapters in the city's history. Meanwhile, stories of extraordinary courage began to emerge. Neighbors who had risked their own lives to save strangers, doctors who treated patients for days without rest, sailors who navigated dangerous floodwaters searching for survivors, volunteers arriving from across Texas with food, medical supplies, and clothing. Even amid almost unimaginable devastation, compassion spread faster than despair. The disaster revealed not only the immense power of nature, but also the remarkable resilience of ordinary people. As news finally reached the rest of the United States, shock swept across the nation. Newspapers filled their front pages with photographs unlike anything Americans had ever seen. Entire city blocks reduced to splinters, ships resting in the middle of neighborhoods, survivors standing atop endless fields of debris where homes once stood. The death toll continued climbing. 6,000, then 7,000. Eventually, historians would estimate that between 6,000 and 8,000 people lost their lives, more than any other natural disaster in American history. The nation realized that Galveston had not simply endured a hurricane. It had witnessed one of the greatest catastrophes ever recorded on American soil. Yet even as grief filled the island, the people of Galveston refused to abandon their city. Among the shattered streets and broken foundations, conversations about rebuilding had already begun. Few believed the task would be easy. Some believed it was impossible, but the survivors had endured the worst night of their lives. And they had no intention of surrendering what remained. From the ruins of one of America's greatest disasters, a remarkable story of engineering, determination, and rebirth was about to begin. When the rescue efforts finally gave way to recovery, the people of Galveston faced a question unlike any they had ever imagined. Should they rebuild, or should they abandon the island forever? To many outsiders, the answer seemed obvious. The city had been nearly destroyed. Thousands were dead. Entire neighborhoods had vanished beneath the storm surge. Surely no one would choose to live in a place that nature had so violently reclaimed. But the people of Galveston saw something different. They saw home. Within days of the disaster, merchants reopened whatever businesses they could. Families salvaged bricks, lumber, and furniture from the endless fields of debris. Churches held services beneath temporary shelters. Schools resumed classes wherever space could be found. Life returned in small, determined steps. Every repaired roof, every cleared street, every rebuilt storefront became an act of quiet defiance against the storm that had nearly erased the city. Still, everyone understood one unavoidable truth. If Galveston was going to survive, it could never remain as vulnerable as it had been before. The hurricane had exposed a fatal weakness. The island sat too low. The Gulf would return someday, and next time the city had to be ready. Engineers proposed a solution so ambitious that many believed it was impossible. First, they would construct a massive concrete seawall along the Gulf shoreline. Then, they would do something almost unimaginable. They would raise the elevation of the entire city, not individual buildings, the city itself. Construction of the seawall began in 1902. Built from reinforced concrete and stretching for miles along the coast, it stood 17 feet above sea level. It was designed to break the force of incoming storm surges before they reached the city. But the seawall alone could not solve the problem. The neighborhoods behind it still sat dangerously low. So engineers undertook one of the greatest civil engineering projects in American history. Using an intricate network of hydraulic pumps, workers injected millions of cubic yards of sand beneath existing buildings. Entire city blocks were slowly lifted. Some homes rose more than 10 feet while families continued living inside them. Churches, hotels, schools, businesses. Even massive stone buildings were carefully elevated as the ground beneath them gradually rose. Street by street, block by block, Galveston climbed above the sea. The project took years. It required extraordinary planning, remarkable engineering, and relentless determination. By the time it was complete, much of the city stood several feet higher than it had before the hurricane. The seawall and raised elevation transformed Galveston into one of the best protected coastal cities in America. That investment would prove its worth. In 1915, another powerful hurricane struck the Texas coast. The storm was similar in strength to the disaster of 1900, but this time, Galveston endured. The seawall held. Although the city suffered damage and many lives were still tragically lost, the devastation was nowhere near the catastrophe that had unfolded 15 years earlier. The lessons of 1900 had saved countless future lives. The hurricane also transformed the science of weather forecasting. Meteorologists began placing far greater emphasis on storm surge rather than wind alone. Communication between weather agencies improved. Observation networks expanded across the Caribbean and Gulf of Mexico. Decades later came aircraft reconnaissance, then radar, then satellites capable of tracking hurricanes from the moment they formed over the Atlantic. Today, millions of people receive warnings days before landfall because of lessons learned through disasters like Galveston. Modern forecasting cannot stop a hurricane, but it gives people something the residents of 1900 never truly had: time. Yet despite all the advances in technology, one truth has never changed. Nature always deserves respect. No seawall is invincible. No forecast is perfect. Every generation must remember that the sea has shaped human history long before cities ever rose along its shores. Galveston remains a living reminder of that reality. Visitors walking along the seawall today often see a peaceful coastal city filled with beaches, historic neighborhoods, and restored Victorian architecture. It is difficult to imagine that beneath those streets lies one of the greatest engineering projects in American history, or that thousands of lives were forever intertwined with the ground beneath their feet. More than a century has passed since the great Galveston hurricane. The names of many victims have faded into history. The voices of those who survived are now silent, but their story endures, not simply because it was America's deadliest natural disaster, but because it revealed both the terrifying power of nature and the extraordinary resilience of ordinary people. The hurricane destroyed a city. It did not destroy its spirit, And perhaps that is the greatest lesson Galveston leaves behind. Not that humanity can conquer the sea, but that even after our darkest nights, we possess an extraordinary ability to rebuild, to remember, and to rise once more. Because history is not only written by the storms that change the world, it is also written by the people who refuse to let those storms have the final word. On any quiet morning, Galveston seems like an ordinary coastal city. The waves roll gently onto the beach. Seagulls circle above the harbor. Visitors stroll along the seawall, stopping to admire the gulf stretching endlessly toward the horizon. At first glance, there is little to suggest that this peaceful place was once the scene of the deadliest natural disaster in American history. But history has a way of leaving its mark, sometimes in monuments, sometimes in photographs, and sometimes in the landscape itself. More than 120 years have passed since the Great Galveston Hurricane of 1900. Generations have come and gone. The city has grown. Businesses have reopened. Historic buildings have been restored. Children once again play along the beaches where unimaginable destruction unfolded. Life continued just as it always does. Yet beneath every street lies a reminder of what happened here. Much of the ground people walk on today did not exist in 1900. Millions of cubic yards of sand were pumped beneath the city, lifting entire neighborhoods several feet higher than before. Galveston quite literally rebuilt itself from the ground up. It is one of the most remarkable engineering achievements in American history. The hurricane also changed the nation. Disaster preparedness became a growing priority. Weather forecasting evolved from scattered observations into one of the most sophisticated scientific systems ever developed. Today, satellites monitor storms every minute. Aircraft fly directly into hurricanes to measure their strength. Computer models simulate their future paths days in advance. Emergency managers coordinate evacuations, affecting millions of people. Every advance traces part of its history back to tragedies like Galveston. Every forecast carries lessons learned from those who never had the chance to receive one. But perhaps the hurricane's greatest legacy is not technological. It is human. The story of Galveston reminds us that civilization often gives us an illusion of permanence. We build towering buildings, busy ports, prosperous cities. We begin to believe they will always be there. Then nature reminds us how fragile even our greatest achievements can be. In a single night, an entire city can change forever. And yet, history tells another story as well, one not only of destruction, but of resilience. The people of Galveston buried their dead, cleared their streets, raised their city, built a seawall that still stands today. They transformed unimaginable loss into determination. They refused to let tragedy define the future. That resilience became part of Galveston's identity. It remains there still. Today, visitors can walk the same shoreline where the storm surge came ashore in 1900. Few realize they are standing several feet above the original ground level. The city beneath their feet is both old and new. A place rebuilt without forgetting. A place where remembrance has become part of the landscape. The seawall stands not only as a barrier against future storms, but as a monument to every life forever changed by that September night. History often remembers disasters by numbers. 6,000 lives, perhaps 8,000, thousands of homes destroyed, billions of gallons of seawater pushed across a barrier island. But numbers alone can never tell the whole story. Every statistic represents a family, a dream, a future that vanished with the tide. That is why remembering matters, not to dwell on tragedy, but to honor the people who lived through it and the lessons they left behind. The Great Galveston Hurricane was not simply a storm. It became a turning point. It reshaped a city. It transformed American engineering. It revolutionized hurricane forecasting, and it forever changed the relationship between people and the sea. Its legacy lives on every time a hurricane warning is issued, every time a coastal community evacuates, every time engineers design stronger flood defenses. The echoes of 1900 are still with us. As the sun sets over the Gulf of Mexico, the water looks calm once again. It is difficult to imagine that the same horizon once concealed a force capable of changing history overnight. Perhaps that is nature's greatest paradox. Its beauty and its power have always existed side by side. The sea gives life. The sea takes life. and humanity continues to build along its shores, hoping to understand a force that can never be fully controlled. The people of Galveston learned that lesson at an unimaginable cost. Their story deserves to be remembered, not only because of how they suffered, but because of how they endured. Thank you for watching Forgotten Files.